Make no mistake, he's aware of this. You're right. Trump, I could shoot someone on Times Square and I would still win. And he was right. I do think that was another very truthful thing that Donald Trump said. I'm saying it. There was one thing that we here at the Hasanabi broadcast also defend Trump on, and that is Trump doing everything right. Bro, what the fuck? Let the outro music play? Okay, take a week off, dude. Shut the fuck up. Seriously, not the time. Mods, you can lower the ban to like a day or something.
Interfering with the 2020 presidential election. He's alleged to have participated in a vast conspiracy to interfere with the election and hold on to power. Yes, a federal grand jury impaneled in Washington, D.C. has indicted Donald J. Trump on 4 felony counts as part of Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into efforts to overturn the 2020 presidential election.
I did everything right and they indicted me.
Yeah, that's right. What are you going to say about that, liberal eagle? Huh? What could you possibly say about this?
I did everything right and they indicted me.
Exactly. That is the best defense, legally speaking, anyone could have.
Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with felony violations.
I did everything right and they indicted me.
With doing everything right and indicting him.
Of our national security laws, as well as participating in a conspiracy to obstruct justice.
So if you're counting, that makes 3 indictments and 78 criminal counts in 2 states and the District of Columbia. Donald Trump is the first president in U.S. history to try to interrupt the peaceful transfer of power to his successor, and the first Home Alone 2 actor to be indicted 3 separate times.
Down the hall and to the left.
So how close did the conspirators come to succeeding, and how serious did they think it would be for Trump to refuse to leave? Well, according to the indictment, when a deputy White House counsel told one of Trump's co-conspirators, Jeffrey Clark, that there would be mass protests if Trump remained president despite no findings of voter fraud, Clark said, quote, "That's why we have an Insurrection Act." Now, there was wild speculation about what this indictment would actually look like, and here what the Department of Justice did is very interesting. Instead of breaking things up piecemeal, they allege that all the efforts to change or subvert the election are part of one general conspiracy that aimed to reverse the election. And while the indictment mentions the Capitol riots and Trump's speech from that day, none of the...
Why is there like a background noise? This sounds like it's raining behind LegalEagle. I guess maybe the world is crying for a brave and bold soldier being indicted despite doing everything right. I think that's what's going on. Am I becoming an audio pervert? Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
The alleged crimes rely on the riots or that speech. The indictment doesn't charge Trump for inciting the January 6th riots. That would have been extremely hard to prove for reasons that we've discussed on this channel a lot, namely that the standard is very high and it would be very close to charging someone for potentially political speech.
Wait, hold on.
Crimes rely on the riots or that speech. The indictment doesn't charge Trump for inciting the January 6th riots. That would have been extremely
LegalEagle on the Kai Cenat situation.
Hard to prove for reasons that we've discussed on this channel a lot, namely that the standard is very high and it would be very close to charging someone for potentially political speech. But here, the riots, according to the Department of Justice's narrative, were just another opportunity for the conspirators to delay or overturn the election. For example, during the riots, the conspirators were texting and calling senators to try to get them to delay certification and to pressure Mike Pence. So the riots were not an end in themselves, but a means to further the conspiracy. And this is a much cleaner way of conceptualizing the crimes from the DOJ's perspective than other ways that they could have drafted this indictment. Instead,
it is pretty smart to do it like this. I mean, yeah.
Instead of lots of small towers with limited foundations, they constructed one giant tower with a huge base. Or more specifically, 3 large conspiracies sort of operating in parallel at the same time with generally the same aim. The first conspiracy was to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election by using knowingly false claims of election fraud to prevent the
government doing good. Once again, you have to remember something. With respect to Donald Trump, it's not necessarily that the government is doing good. Even though the Department of Justice and the government does sometimes do good. They do. I mean, let's be real. There are, even if the overwhelming majority of ICE and the Customs and Border Patrol revolves around like illegally detaining asylum seekers that have the legal right to be on U.S. soil, for example, there is still a sliver of ICE that is dedicated to dedicated to sex trafficking, of immigrants, You know what I mean? Like there are still, no matter what happens, there are still instances where like the federal government will do good things, right? And the agencies will do good things. However, in this circumstance, the DOJ is doing good. One, because they don't like Trump, certainly, fine. But more importantly than that, Trump is very bad at doing crimes. Like, objectively the worst at doing crimes. Because of his long history of his long and you know, really target-rich history of constantly failing upwards by doing criminal misconduct in the most laughable and you know, apparent, obvious ways, that he thinks that he could just get away with whatever the heck he wants to. Make no mistake, he's aware of this. You're right. Trump, I could shoot someone on Times Square and I would still win. And he was right. I do think that that was another very truthful thing that Donald Trump said. But that is precisely the reason why you have a lot of, especially two, open and shut cases that Trump is facing at the moment. Because he does do everything right. He's just always openly doing crimes.
The actual slates of electors being collected, counted, and certified. The second conspiracy was to corruptly obstruct and impede an official proceeding. That is the actual certification of the electoral vote. And then the third conspiracy was to effectively hamper the right of some people to exercise their right to vote, effectively trying to discount or prevent the votes being counted in states where Biden won, where the conspirators were putting forth a fake slate of electors. Now, a quick word about conspiracy and free speech. Many are bemoaning the indictment as the criminalization of political speech.
I love that. Before LegalEagle gets into this is something that is fascinating with Americans that I've talked about quite a bit, especially over the course of the past couple of years, where Americans, especially those who constantly talk about free speech, demonstrably do not understand free speech as a concept. They don't get it. There are limitations to the fucking First Amendment. It's in the amendment. It's like right there. Like it very openly states what kind of speech is not protected. A criminal conspiracy does not fall in the guidelines of free speech. It is so strange that this like very easy to understand concept somehow Americans have completely avoided harder than the top of the hour ad break when you're already subscribed. Because at the top of the hour, there's a 3-minute ad break. If you no longer want to see those ads, if you don't want my speech to be limited and you actually hearing my speech, then all you need to do is subscribe for $5 or for free. Here's the 3-minute ad break now. I'm going to mail your cat to Zanzibar on the 11th of Zanzibar, April at 7:30 p.m. What? Are you demonstrating what doesn't actually constitute for free speech or something? Like, what's happening? Anyway, let's continue.
But that seems to be based on a misunderstanding of how criminal conspiracies actually work. Consider this great commentary from NYU law professor Noah Rosenblum. The First Amendment protects the right to free speech, but does that mean that you can say whatever you want without facing criminal liability? Not at all. Consider the following two scenarios. I walk into a store and buy a crowbar. No crime, life is good. 2, I call my buddy and say, let's go buy crowbars and use them to deprive people of their right to vote. He says, I agree, let's conspire to do this thing together. I walk in the store and buy a crowbar. Bad news, crime, life is bad. The only difference—
I don't know why LegalEagle didn't use my analogy. Maybe it's because I'm not a lawyer, whatever. Maybe it's because I don't even remember what my LSAT score was, but it definitely wasn't good enough. But just saying, I said you can't conspire to rob a bank and then actually try to end up robbing the bank and then fail to rob the bank and then turn around and go, oh, well, that's not free speech. Just saying, that's good. Anyway, let's continue.
The difference between these two acts is the fact of agreement, which is expressed in speech, although it needn't be. The crime is conspiracy, agreement to commit a crime plus a step towards its accomplishment. It's not the speech that's criminal, it's what the speech does, constitute an element of another crime. Here, Trump is charged with conspiracy, but the lies he made about the election are part of showing his knowing fraud an element of the crime. Don't worry, you can still lie in politics as much as you want, just don't do it as an element of another crime, like say participating in a conspiracy to defraud people of their right to vote. And that's exactly right. The only thing that I would add is a few other scenarios. The third scenario, a person says to themselves, I'm gonna go out and buy a crowbar to deprive people of the right to vote, and then I go out and buy a crowbar. Still not a crime because there's no conspiracy, i.e. an agreement with another person. Now that's important because in conspiracies, if you have an agreement, all you need is one overt act in furtherance of the conspiracy. And in the absence of a conspiracy, the act of buying a crowbar probably isn't enough to rise to the level of attempted interference. Because to attempt a crime by yourself usually requires conduct that constitutes a substantial step towards completing that crime. And then there's the fourth scenario. A person says to themselves, I'm gonna buy a crowbar to deprive people of the right to vote, buys the crowbar, and then actually starts hitting people waiting in line to vote. Now, still there's no conspiracy, but now you've taken a substantial step towards the crime and likely completed the crime, and you're guilty of that initial crime. So in the conspiracy context, and actually in many different legal contexts, speech will be relevant evidence. Was a conspiracy formed? What was the aim of that conspiracy? Did individual members have the requisite intent of the underlying crime? Was an overt action in furtherance of the conspiracy taken? Did the defendant say factually false things to induce others to act? But here, it's not the speech that's punished, it's the conspiracy. So with that in mind, that takes us to the indictment itself. The indictment starts by correctly noting that Trump had a right to speak about the election, quote, and even to claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. He was also entitled to challenge the results through lawful means, such as, quote, seeking recounts or audits of the popular vote in states or filing lawsuits, challenging ballots and...
He did do that, by the way. Of course, every single instance, as the court document shows, was uniformly unsuccessful. Going back to the bank robbery analogy, it's like wanting to work at the bank as a teller to make money from the bank. You know what I mean? Or trying to do a slip and fall in front of the bank and trying to steal money from the bank that way. Failing to do that, even though that's also technically fraud, but whatever. Really want this analogy to take off? Yes, because it's a good analogy. I'm not very good at analogies. I can't understand without crowbars. I'm just saying, I'm not very good at analogies, but I think the bank robbery one is perfectly fine. It's a 4 out of 10 and not. Fuck you.
Procedures. And as the indictment notes, Trump pursued these methods, but they were uniformly unsuccessful. However, Trump did not have a right to dispute the election through, quote, unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election results. The indictment says that Trump perpetrated 3 criminal conspiracies to stay in office. And we start with 18 U.S.C. 371. That section criminalizes the use of deceptive practices in connection with any conspiracy for the purpose of impairing, obstructing, or defeating the lawful function of any department of government. Trump is charged with conspiring to stop Congress from certifying the election by submitting fake electoral slates. And there are 2 prongs to Section 371 cases. The offense prong prohibits conspiracies to commit acts that are otherwise defined as criminal under federal law. And the defraud prong prohibits conspiracies to obstruct a lawful function of the government by deceitful means. And the government must prove that the defendant entered into a conspiracy with the specific intent to defraud the United States, that the conspirators used deceitful or dishonest means, and that one of the members of the conspiracy performed at least one overt act for the purpose of carrying out the conspiracy. For the government to prove that Trump committed the crime, it must show that he used deceit, craft, or trickery, or dishonest means to achieve it. Section 371 does not criminalize every conspiracy.
This part is really awesome. Because we go back to the same thing I was talking about with respect to Trump, where he does this so openly. Like he does this so openly that he sometimes does it in public. That's what's so awesome about everything that Donald Trump has done so far, and all of the instances that he's gotten in trouble for. He's just like so clearly doing it in an open way.
To disrupt a government function. It only reaches conspiracies that use deceit, craft, or trickery, or dishonest means. And we'll talk about Trump's defenses later, but he's probably going to claim that he didn't use deceit if he truly believed that he won the election. But the indictment concludes that Trump knew he lost, and the indictment lists all the people who told Trump that he lost, including the vice president, leaders of the DOJ who were appointed by Trump, the director of national intelligence, the director of the Department of Homeland Security's cybersecurity.
All Trump appointees.
Infrastructure Security Agency, senior White House officials, campaign staffers, Republican state legislators and officials, and dozens of state and federal courts. And the indictment alleges that Trump privately acknowledged his loss. After the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff urged Trump not to take action on a national security issue, Trump agreed, saying, quote, "Yeah, you're right, it's too late for us. We're going to give that to the next guy." Yet publicly, Trump repeatedly tweeted and encouraged his supporters to come to Washington on January 6th to stop the vote. And allegedly, in another conversation on
Ooh. Oh, let's run that again. Ooh.
his supporters to come to Washington, give that to the next guy issue, Trump agreed, saying, quote,
There's also the other aspect of him telling Mike Pence that Mike Pence is too honest when Mike Pence was like, yeah, sorry, Mr. President, like, I can't fucking stop this, like, basically symbolic process of certifying votes from going through. Donald Trump calls out former handpicked Vice President Mike Pence for condemning him on recent January 6th indictment. I once read a major magazine article on Mike. It said he was not a very good person. I was surprised, but the article was right. Sad. Wow. It's finally happened. Little Mike Pence, a man who was about to be ousted as governor of Indiana until I came along and made him my vice president, has gone to the dark side, which, by the way, he capitalized, so you know it's real. I never told a newly emboldened, not based on his 2% poll numbers, Pence, to put me above the Constitution or that Mike was too honest. He's delusional, and now he wants to show he's a tough guy. I once read a major magazine article on Mike. It said he was not a very good person. I was surprised, but the article was right. Sad. Bye-bye. Yeah. I didn't believe in magic till I saw my dogs turn into a snake. One man, two faces. Bye-bye. It's like Logan Paul being like, I know I tried to do a cryptocurrency rug pull, but one, the scammers that I hired to do that scammed me instead. And two, have you noticed that they're criminals? It's like, bro, you hired them. Like, even if what you're saying is true, you're the one who made him your vice president. You're just basically posting your fucking L's. Anyway, the too honest part, he's attacking.
Yeah, you're right, it's too late for us. We're going to give that to the next guy. Yet publicly, Trump repeatedly tweeted and encouraged his supporters to come to Washington on January 6th to stop the vote. And allegedly, in another conversation on January 1st, 2021.
To be fair, I'm going to defend Trump here because I love him. And because he did everything right and they indicted him. You can make the argument that, like, yeah, it's too late for us. We're going to give that to the next guy. Could absolutely mean that, like, he still maintains the position that the election was stolen from him, but there's not really much he can do to stop it at that point. You know what I mean? And of course, that's because the election was stolen from him.
One, Mike Pence told Trump that he didn't think that there was a constitutional basis for Trump's claims that the vice president lacked the authority to change the results of the election. And quote, in response, the defendant told Vice President, "You're too honest." Now, this strongly implies that Trump knew he had lost and was asking Pence to lie. And there are other examples. Apparently, he referred to some of Sidney Powell's theories as crazy. And even Rudy Giuliani said, quote, "We don't have the evidence, but we have..."
Remember I talked about this the other day? One, because Sidney Powell is fucking crazy, but two, Trump used to, apparently he did this with Michael Pillow of the Mr. Pillow Foundation, Mike Lindell, and also with Sidney Powell, where he would just like openly make fun of them for being like psychotic kooks. And he would do it in the most Trumpian fashion, where he wanted to like, he would do it in a very public capacity. He would do it in front of random people. He would do it in front of maybe even recording devices. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, a lot of that stuff, when you're the president, is documented. It's everything that you're saying and doing is like, it might be classified, but it's still documented. And it's gonna be really hard to counter that when, you know, all of that information comes out. You're the president.
Have lots of theories. But despite this, it is alleged that Trump knowingly continued to make false claims about the election and further took actions to subvert the election. And the indictment notes that they might have tricked other people into action. For example, the fraudulent electors were, quote, tricked into participating based on the understanding that their votes would be used only if the defendant succeeded in outcome determinative lawsuits within their state, which the defendant never did. The defendant and co-conspirators then caused these fraudulent electors to transmit their false certificates to the vice president and other government officials to be counted at the certification proceedings on January 6, 2020. Now, some legal commentators claim that the government needs to...
I'm sorry, it's like a kid. You're a kid. I don't care. if you were working with supposedly world-renowned constitutional scholars, you're like a child. The incredible conspiracy that you cooked up to win was that of a fucking baby's brain. It was so baby brain. Like, you thought that people were just going to be like, oh man, the certification process was subdued and intercepted and changed. Uh-oh. I guess Trump is still president now. Like, how can you be so fucking stupid? Which, of course, leads into additional charges in there where, like, people at every step of the way were telling Trump, like, you can't do this. This is, like, incredibly stupid, illegal, and also no one will fall for it. The last part of it was, no one will fall for this. People will riot. To which some of his co-conspirators replied with, yeah, that's what the military's there for. Like, you have to be even dumber than the average dumbass hog to think that the American people would have looked at a symbolic part of the election certification process that they didn't even know about prior to January 6th. Because no matter how invested in politics you are, you don't know every fucking minutia in the electoral certification process. The idea that the vote certification happening in the House and Senate is a genuinely important part is incredibly stupid. Most people didn't even know it existed, and absolutely 0% of the times, that part of the process is the most important part. You know what is an objectively more important part of the process? Television channels. That's it. Many people don't know this, probably even to this day, unless maybe you've been in here long enough, or unless maybe you actually watched Succession or whatever. But the real way that the American public finds out who won is not because they tabulated all the results of the votes. No, they have projections. That's why it says projected winner. Most people don't even recognize that when they're watching the TV on election night, where it says projected winner. The reason why they say projected winner is because they haven't actually counted all the votes yet. But the media is at that point looking at the statistics rigorously, looking at prior data from the exact same places, and making that projection, which is almost always correct. That's how the American people understand who won the election. I guess the only time that that's been a issue is 2000, in the 2000 election. Yes, exactly, except Al Gore versus Bush in Florida. So it has this situation of like looking at vote certifications and like trying to stop that from happening is so stupid. It feels like a child came up with it. It's like thinking that if Donald Trump doesn't attend the inauguration and offer good graces to the upcoming president, then technically no transfer of power occurred, and therefore technically he's still the president. It's like being one of these like psychotic people on TikTok who think, oh, Trump is on a police convoy and there's an ambulance at the end of the convoy, which means he's still technically the president. Like, you have to be just a delusional psycho. Doesn't matter if you're the eminent constitutional scholar, okay? That is like globally known and well respected. That idea is a child's idea. Let's continue with LegalEagle.
Prove that the defendant intended to swindle money or other tangible objects from the victim in order to be charged under Section 371. But that's only true if Trump was charged with a fraud crime like wire fraud. But here, he wasn't. The prosecutor doesn't need to prove that the conspiracy actually led to any property or monetary loss by the US government or its agencies. The Department of Justice's Criminal Resource Manual cites a 1924 case, Hammerschmidt versus United States, for this proposition. And in that case, Justice Taft wrote, quote, "It is not necessary that the government shall be subjected to property or pecuniary loss by the fraud, but only that its legitimate official action and purpose shall be defeated by misrepresentation, chicane, or overreaching of those charged with carrying out the governmental intention." And
the irony here is that they succeeded in stopping January 6th from happening, which plays a role in this, in basically solidifying the case against him. Like, you have a better argument. You have a better argument if January 6th never actually ended up stopping the vote certification process. But you don't have that now because January 6th did happen and they did stop the certification, at least delayed it.
Several more recent cases have affirmed that the word defraud in Section 371, quote, "not only reaches financial or property loss through the use of a scheme or artifice to defraud, but also is designed and intended to protect the integrity of the United States and its agencies, programs, and policies." Now, the second criminal charge relates to subsection 1512K, which makes conspiracy to violate Section 1512 a separate offense subject to the same penalties as the underlying offense. And a 1512K charge has no specific overt act element, and the courts have generally declined to imply one under such circumstances. Now, regardless of which section is invoked, conspirators are criminally liable for any crime committed in the foreseeable furtherance of the conspiracy. The indictment says that Trump, quote, "did knowingly combine, conspire, confederate, and agree with co-conspirators, known and unknown to the grand jury, to corruptly obstruct and impede an official proceeding, that is, the certification of the electoral vote." Now, there are many examples of Trump and his co-conspirators trying to stop the certification process, and their actions on January 6th are notable, as the indictment accuses the conspirators of exploiting the violence at the Capitol in furtherance of their plot. After the rioters had been removed from the Capitol, Trump, through White House aides, attempted to reach 2 United States senators at 6 p.m. From 6:59 p.m. until 7:18 p.m., Rudy Giuliani placed calls to 5 United States senators and 1 United States representative. Co-conspirator 6 attempted to confirm phone numbers for 6 United States senators whom defendant had directed Giuliani to call, an attempt to enlist in further delaying the certification. Quote, in one of the calls, Giuliani left a voicemail intended for a United States senator that said, quote, "We need you, our Republican friends, to try to just slow it down so we can get these legislatures to get more information to you, and know they're reconvening at 8 tonight, but the only strategy we can follow is to object to numerous states and raise issues so that we get ourselves into tomorrow, ideally until the end of tomorrow." Trump also...
Yeah. Not only was it fucking absolutely idiotic, like, not only did this massive conspiracy they were able to cook up was so stupid that, like, everyone with 3.5 brain cells, including even Republicans, would be like, okay, maybe that's not really how things work. I don't know if you can do that. But they still attempted to do it in this, like, really stupid way that left a massive paper trail and brought in a lot of people that were obviously going to be like, well, I don't want to do that. Or even if they were sycophants, they would absolutely not want to go to jail and will not perjure themselves in an actual legal setting. So they're going to be honest about it. They're going to be like, okay, well, yeah, no, Rudy Giuliani did call me. That is correct. That's part of the reason why I think Trump is trying to, like, shift the blame away from his own personal responsibilities and leaning heavily on his own lawyers, his co-conspirators, throwing him under the bus. Now, of course, it doesn't matter because Trump has spoken about all of these issues so many fucking times. And also because he's narcissistic as hell, he very clearly was directing a lot of this, almost singularly. So the idea that this was your lawyer's fault that gave you shitty information to act on is not going to work.
Called another senator repeating false allegations of fraud in Arizona and Georgia. He also, quote, claimed that the vice president's actions had been surprising and asked the senator to, quote, object to every state and kind of spread this out a little bit like a filibuster. Shortly before the meeting to certify the election, White House counsel urged Trump to drop his objections and allow the meetings to proceed. Trump refused. The meeting of Congress was delayed for 6 hours, and when it resumed at 8 p.m., it certified Biden's election as president. Now, it's actually not weird that Trump's co-conspirators were lawyers, because sadly, finding a great lawyer is hard to do. But if you need a really good lawyer, my firm, Eagle Team, can help. If you've been in a car crash, suffered a data breach, or have a Social Security disability issue, we can represent you or help find you the right attorney who can. Just click on the link that's in the description for a free consultation with my team. Because you don't just need a legal team, you need the Eagle Team. And the link is down below. Now, the third charge relates to 18 U.S.C. 1512c2. Trump was indicted for obstructing an official proceeding of Congress. Now, the initial
Yeah, it really shows the limitations of conspiracy in terms of how many people you can involve. Yeah, and also like if it's you can conspire to do shit. It also matters what your goals are and what the actions you took are. I respected that segue, which is why I let it run. Kai needs the Eagle team. Yeah, LegalEagle needs to defend Kai.
Media reports about the target letter were confusing because they reported that Trump was being charged with witness tampering. And that's because the short title of 18 U.S.C. 1512 is tampering with a witness, victim, or informant. But here, Trump wasn't charged with witness tampering per se. Section 1512 covers other kinds of obstruction of justice. He was actually charged with violating Section C2 of the statute, which states, whoever corruptly obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. Now, Section 1512C was added to the code as part of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. And to convict Trump under this statute, the government has to prove that he attempted to obstruct an official proceeding and that he acted with corrupt intent. The first element is relatively simple for the government to prove. Many of the January 6 rioters were charged with violating 1512C. These defendants argued that the January 6 meeting of Congress was not an official proceeding.
Yeah, it really doesn't look great when, other people have already been charged with the crime that you are being charged with and are already like serving their prison sentences. And almost every single one of them in the court proceedings said they were following your orders. Like, even from how the jury will interpret the situation, it's just like, I'm just saying, it doesn't look good. It certainly doesn't look good.
But courts ruled against them because Section 1515A1 defines official proceeding for purposes of Section 1512 to include a congressional proceeding. Now, the second element is whether Trump acted with corrupt intent. And some of the January 6 defendants challenged their indictments on the grounds that this element is unconstitutionally vague since the...
You know what's funny? You just said this was such a bad insurrection. Still an insurrection though, bro. That's exactly what I said in the aftermath of January 6th. I think like my final conclusion at the end of the day was that it was like kind of laughable, but also still insane that they tried it. Like, and here we are, you know?
The word corruptly isn't defined by Section 1512C. But several circuit courts have already rejected this contention. The courts conclude that corruptly in 1512C includes two components. One, intent to obstruct, impede, or influence, and two, wrongfulness. And then count number 4 relates to the deprivation of rights under color of state law under 18 U.S.C. 241. Now, under that section, a government official can't deprive someone of their rights. And the statute dates from the Reconstruction era, but it doesn't require that the defendant's conduct be motivated by a specific bias against the victim, such as race, gender, or discrimination. But Section 241 makes it unlawful for 2 or more persons to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or because of his having so exercised the same. And here the idea is that the conspirators conspired to prevent people from being able to exercise their right to vote. The offense is always a felony, even if the underlying conduct would not on its own establish a felony violation of another criminal civil rights statute. Now, critics of this indictment believe that Trump shouldn't have been charged with violating Section 241 because this law was passed during Reconstruction as a way to punish members of the Ku Klux Klan and other people from harassing black voters. And while it's true that this law was originally aimed at stopping harassment of black voters after the Civil War, it is in no way limited to stopping white Confederates from intimidation and harassment. And the DOJ has used this law to prosecute conspiracies to prevent the proper counting of ballots in federal elections for more than 100 years. The DOJ has charged government officials under 241 when officials tried to stuff a ballot box with forged ballots.
Yeah, no, it's even if they made that distinction, I feel like it would still apply. You know what I mean? I'm just saying, like, it's one of those circumstances where you could be like, oh, well, is he defending the Confederate flag? And it's like, well, yeah, he is. He has. Like, let's say that the standard is that, like, you have to literally be like a white Confederate or a supporter of the Confederacy in order for you to be charged with this. You could absolutely make an argument that Trump is a supporter of the Confederacy by just looking at the metric ton of shit that he has said in defense of the Confederacy, whether it be defending its generals, whether it be saying that there are good people on both sides, whether it be claiming that the Nazis that wanted to, that went to Charlottesville to do a Nazi rally were simply there to defend a Confederate statue because they love history. So even if that was the case, I feel like you could still make an open and shut argument for Donald Trump. Obviously, that's not the case, so it doesn't matter, but still pretty funny.
Prevent the official count of ballots in primary elections, destroy voter registration applications, destroy ballots, exploit the infirmities of elderly or handicapped people by casting absentee ballots in their names, illegally register votes and cast absentee ballots in their names, injure, threaten, or intimidate a voter in the exercise of their right to vote.
How much you want to bet? I don't want to go down this. I don't want to look at it individually, every single one. How much you want to bet almost all of these, with some exceptions. Sorry, exceptions. What am I saying? With certain exceptions, are all Republicans, or not Republicans necessarily, but conservatives, right? Because you could have some Dixiecrats doing this shit too. Like every single thing that they have charged people with, like looking at this, it just seems like nothing really changed. And, they're still doing this sort of shit. Like, electioneering is illegal, right? And it's a very simple thing that Republicans violate regularly. They wear, like, Trump and MAGA shit to the polls, all the way to this last election cycle where they had armed people showing up to the polling stations. They haven't really stopped. There is no real deterrence that where... The deterrence measures and the legal repercussions don't necessarily stop conservatives from behaving in the way that they want to because their sense of entitlement is too powerful.
A voter in the exercise of their right to vote, impersonate qualified voters, fail to count votes and to alter votes counted, to steal votes by changing the votes cast by voters in voting machines. And the list goes on and on. Now,
I don't think there's a precedent for assembling false electors as publishing false electoral states. I think that's a first. Yeah, I wasn't talking about that. Especially because that's a really stupid way to do this. You know what I'm saying? Like, the reason why it has not happened in the past, in my opinion, is because it is probably the dumbest point to tackle. Like, it's not a very intelligent way to try and steal an election. Even the brute force measures that the Republican Party utilized in 2000, while they were simultaneously obviously working the legal angle, which was significantly more important, like even that was smarter than what Trump was trying to do because the election it was done. It was over at that point. Like trying to change the outcome when there is no discrepancy in the results that should automatically trigger some sort of recount, when all of the recounts have been done, like tabulations have been done, recounts have been done time and time again, at that point, it is so jover. It's so crazy to try and do that.
Many of these alleged crimes will hinge on Trump's mental state. And we've covered this before. Did Trump have a specific intent to obstruct, impede, or influence the proceeding of Congress? Well, it's definitely possible. But since this indictment came down, there have been a lot of bad legal takes about what it actually means, especially with respect to Trump's mental state and what the
Thank you, boys who wonder for the 5. Get the subs in slow Shalodion.
prosecutors actually have to prove. Many journalists and even some lawyers have said that in order to convict Trump on these charges, prosecutors must prove that Trump knew that he lost the election. See, for example, this headline in the Washington Post, which says, "The former president's intent and whether he knew he was lying about the election fraud are key issues for prosecutors." Now, this is a big misunderstanding about what prosecutors must prove about Trump's mental state. Now, look, this stuff is hard, but it's not that hard. Now, first of all, criminal prosecutors prove intent and internal mental states all the time. It's not impossible. It's not even that hard. You can do it using statements that the defendant said. You can prove it using surrounding circumstances. Or in the case of conspiracies, you can even use the statements of your co-conspirators. Because in a conspiracy, you're generally liable for the acts of your co-conspirators, and the statements of your co-conspirators are not hearsay. And second of all, prosecutors have been using the statutes under which Trump has been charged against the January 6th protesters with great success. And Trump's potential defenses and issues about mental states have been raised and repeatedly rejected. He's not the first guy to claim that there was election fraud and thus his actions were excused. Now, to review, the DOJ says that Trump intentionally participated in 3 conspiracies that violate federal law. First, Trump is charged with violating Section 371 that makes it illegal to conspire to defraud or lie to the United States. The meaning of defraud is interfering or obstructing a lawful government function by deceit, craft, or trickery or dishonest means. The indictment alleges facts showing that Trump used deceit and trickery and dishonest means to replace the legitimate electors with fake ones. And that's the reason for the heading on page 27, which says, quote, the defendants attempt to leverage the Justice Department to use deceit to get state officials to replace legitimate electors and electoral votes with defendants. And what Trump believed about the
Yeah, this, once again, absolutely nutty. Getting nutty with it in a very dumb way. I feel as though there are significantly better ways to try way before this point to change the results of an election.
State officials to replace legitimate electors and electoral votes with defendants. And what Trump believed about the 2020 election, and thus whether he lied or was mistaken, goes to the element of deceit in Section 371. And that's arguably one of the reasons why the indictment contains so much information about whether Trump lied or not. In addition, it also just provides color and explanation about his motive. And if he did not actually believe he won the 2020 election, he would almost certainly have violated Section 371's prohibition against defrauding the United States government, i.e. lying to the government. But the second conspiracy is that Trump and his co-conspirators obstructed the January 6th congressional proceeding where the election would be certified in violation of 2 sections of Section 1512. And someone else who was charged with this violation is January 6th defendant Alan Hostetter, who was charged with violating Section 1752C2 and 1512K, just like Trump was. He tried to raise the First Amendment defense that Trump will rely on, but a federal judge rejected this defense, explaining that, quote, Mr. Hostetter is not being prosecuted for engaging in protected First Amendment activity, and I am making my decision without regard to his political beliefs, which I believe he holds sincerely. Mr. Hostetter has a right to believe whatever he likes about the 2020 presidential election and to voice those opinions. But the First Amendment does not give anyone a right to obstruct or impede Congress by making it impossible for them to do their jobs safely. The judge ruled.
And it certainly does not give anyone a right to enter a restricted area while carrying a dangerous weapon. Yup. This, again, is at the heart of the contention that Republicans feel in their core, in the bottom of their hearts. They're like, I don't understand. It means, the First Amendment means I can literally say and do whatever I want, and you have to protect me. Not my enemies, by the way. Not if you're a socialist. Then you should be given the death penalty for saying things like socialism is good. But me, I believe that I can say whatever the fuck I want and there can be no legal repercussions, which is a genuine misunderstanding. And I don't know how American exceptionalism has been so overpowering. Sorry, I just got like this fucking random ass. I don't know what's going on. Got a random ass notification. Sorry. What was I saying? American exceptionalism is such a powerful, American individualism and American exceptionalism is so overpowering. Such a powerful fucking attitude that people feel in their hearts that it is absolutely it absolutely overrides any kind of like genuine understanding, genuine interpretation, reasonable interpretation of the First Amendment. You pretty much can say whatever you want with the exception of threats. You absolutely cannot. Wrong. That's not true. That is not true. If that was the case, then, for example, you would not be able to engage, there would never be a criminal conspiracy. There would be no such criminal conspiracy because it would all still technically be protected. You would be able to engage in fraud. There would be no fraud protection. Like, that concept makes it seem like you just can't do crimes with this. And you absolutely can do crimes with this. Like, you can't fucking hire an assassin and then be like, well, I didn't do anything. I was just engaging in my First Amendment rights. You see what I'm saying? You didn't actually do anything other than say, hey, Can you please go and assassinate someone for me? I will give you money afterwards. But that's still an attempted, like, that's still a crime. You attempted to murder someone by hiring a hitman. You know what I mean? This can get you in a lot of fucking trouble, and often does. True, but I feel like that goes beyond speech. My friend, no, that goes beyond free speech. That's what you are intending to say. And that is the point. The point is that speech across the board, I'm not mad at this person. A lot of people are just like completely oblivious to what the First Amendment looks like and what it covers and what it protects and what it doesn't. Not recognizing that, like, oh, I'm a free speech absolutist is something that a lot of people say, but they don't recognize that, like, even in the United States of America, where the free speech boundaries are not limitless, but seemingly way less limited than even Canada or European countries, where there are hate speech restrictions, for example, that can get you into criminal territory, that where you have to, basically pay a fine or something like that, or even sometimes serve a prison sentence, a jail sentence. You absolutely cannot, should not feel protected by free speech if you are engaging in criminal conspiracies, criminal acts. You absolutely will still go to jail. Someone in the chat brought up Charles Manson, which is a great example of this. Charles Manson, as far as I know, it did not engage in the murders himself. You know what I mean? But murders still happened at his behest. He was doing this, not protected,
that Hofstadter and his co-conspirator, quote, knowingly and intentionally entered into that agreement with the intent of furthering its unlawful goal of disrupting and impeding the Electoral College certification. And similarly, in Trump's situation, the government need only show that he intentionally took steps to obstruct the Electoral College certification. So, for example, when the government points to Trump's speech at the Ellipse, they don't have to prove that in his mind he knew everything he was saying was a lie. Instead, the speech is evidence that he wanted to encourage people to physically occupy the Capitol. And once those people were inside the Capitol and the certification was delayed, Trump and his co-conspirators.
You could get away with murder by saying, sure, would be nice if this person died. I have a locker full of money at this location. These are unrelated protected statements. No, I don't think you could get away with that. You absolutely could not get away with that. It's like thinking that, oh, no, that was a joke. Oh, okay, my bad. What about the girl who went to prison for her boyfriend committing suicide? That case really shows the limitations of free speech. Yeah, 100%. There are so many instances in the United States of America where people have been criminally charged for exercising their free speech. It's just that there are understandable, very reasonable, and even sometimes unreasonable limitations to such, to the constitutional standard. Like, one example I can give you is anti-BDS laws. Boycott, divestments, and sanctions on the state of Israel is a completely protected act of political speech. And yet, numerous states, ironically, a lot of them are red states, by the way, have anti-BDS laws in place where you, for example, can't be a public school teacher in the state of Texas if you don't sign a document that says you will not and never have protested against the state of Israel. That's insane. That is a completely nutty way that these First Amendment defenders give the game away and openly show that they're not interested in free speech absolutism or even following the constitutional limitations, and instead just weaponizing it and basically wanting to say whatever they want to while rendering their political interlocutors unable to say whatever they want to.
Continued to act in furtherance of their
People think you're joking. It's law. Yeah, I don't think people understand. Every time I talk about the anti-BDS laws, people lose their minds. There's also other exercises of free speech that you can get absolutely shellacked over, like whistleblowers, for example.
Conspiracy by calling senators to further delay the vote. And Trump's subjective belief and motive might help explain those actions, but they're not necessary to prove the crime that he's alleged of. And the third conspiracy is that Trump allegedly interfered with the right to vote and to have one's vote counted in violation of Section 241. And that section requires that the defendant had an intent to deprive an individual of their rights and that the federal right violated was clearly delineated. And in a January 6th prosecution of Douglas Mackey, a jury instruction explained that the government had to prove, quote, that the defendant knowingly and intentionally joined the conspiracy with the intent to further a specific objective. And the Mackey jury instruction explains how a jury should assess the defendant's criminal intent within the context of this particular section. Quote, the indictment alleges that the objective of the charged conspiracy was to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate one or more persons in the free exercise and enjoyment of their right to vote. The government must therefore prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendant knowingly and intentionally joined the conspiracy with the intent to further that objective. In this case, the government has alleged that the object of the conspiracy was specifically to injure one or more persons in the free exercise and enjoyment of their right to vote. I instruct you that the statute covers conduct intended to obstruct, hinder, prevent, frustrate, make difficult or impossible, or indirectly rather than directly assault free exercise of the right. For example, hinder is defined as to make slow or difficult the progress of, to hamper, to hold back, to prevent, to check. And again, Trump's subjective belief about the overall election or election fraud isn't necessary or an element of the crime. So with the possible exception of the first count, Trump's subjective belief about the 2020 election is basically irrelevant. It's his intentionality about his actions that matter. Here's how elections lawyer Mark Elias explained it. Quote, I walk into a bank and I think they're wrongfully holding my money. I think my balance is $5,000 and they—
Oh, wow. Now he's using bank robbery analogies. Oh, okay. Wow. Wow. Okay, to be fair, that is a fucking absolute banger of a bank robbery analogy. God damn it, dude. This is why I'm not a lawyer and instead a fucking dumbass on Twitch. God damn.
They think my balance is $0, and I genuinely believe that I'm owed $5,000. That doesn't excuse me from robbing the bank. I can't pull out a gun and take the money, particularly with the fake—
Can't do analogies, motherfucker. No, my analogy on the bank robbery was sound. I was just talking about the conspiracy element. I wish I could have heard a bank analogy that was this good sooner so I could appreciate it. Oh, fuck you guys, man. That's actually, dude, why do I need the most diligent haters that are constantly seeking to clip me out of context when I already have you guys in here?
collector scheme, even if you believe that you won, you were not entitled to have people submit fake forms on January 6th. Now, the rioters unsuccessfully took down the US Capitol, but you can successfully get your online data taken down with today's sponsor, Incogni. Now, I don't know about you, but I've seen a huge uptick in the amount of spam that I'm getting, and it's no surprise why. Every year, the number and scope of data breaches worldwide is rising, and you might not know it, but there are hundreds of data brokers that possess and sell your personal information, and their numbers grow every year. These data brokers might have a whole shadow profile on you, including your name, your address, phone number, shopping habits, possibly even your social security number, all up for the highest bidder. At best, this leads to scam calls, and at worst, identity theft and doxing. But that's where Incogni comes in. Incogni fights on your behalf to remove your personal data from data brokers and deals with any objections from their side. All you have to do is create an account and give them approval to work on your behalf.